Water affordability. Issues around water are at a critical juncture. The moratorium on water shutoffs in Detroit is coming to an end on March 31st, which puts many of our friends, colleagues, and neighbors in jeopardy of losing access to water. We want to continue to raise public consciousness on the issues created by water insecurity and lack of accessibility. So on this World Water Day, we thought it fitting to assemble a panel of leaders to provide context as to why we need a local and national affordable water structure. I want to thank our host, We the People of Detroit, the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights, and Freshwater Future for bringing together this amazing panel of experts to lead our discussion. And without further ado, let's get into our program and welcome local activist and co-founder of We the People of Detroit, Cecily McClellan. Cecily McClellan is a native Detroiter responsible for administering the Detroit Residential Water Assistance Program through the Department of Human Services at the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. She is a co-founder of We the People of Detroit and serves as the Director of Water Work, where she coordinates the water hotline and assists residents in navigating the services provided by the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. Cecily assists in providing water relief in the event of a water shutoff and continues to promote water as a human right and the implementation of a city statewide water affordability program. Cecily, take it away.
Democratizing water affordability is a concept way past due. The residents of the city of Detroit have suffered tremendously discriminatory policies and heavy-handed policies of the Department of Water and Sewage. One of the things that I did do for a period of time was the DARWA program, and that was a program that provided assistance through the city of Detroit at the water department. That program, if had been continued after 2012, possibly would have evolved into a water affordability program. It was the closest thing that the water department had provided. But the Detroit residents have suffered from foreclosures because of water bills being transferred over to taxes, to steadfast increases in water bills every year, on an average 9%. And so we reached the point that early in 2015 that we began to provide direct services to the residents of the city of Detroit through We the People of Detroit. And that consisted of providing navigation skills with the water department to make sure that all our residents understood what their rights were, because many residents weren't provided with their rights. The fact that if they had a health crisis, that their water could be restored for a minimum of 21 days, and then they could hope to have the resources to pay for the water bill. Additionally, that clients could be provided with what is called a leakage program, where if you have leakage in your home, you could have your water bill adjusted. Additionally, we began to provide water directly to the residents. So when they could not receive a program within the water department, because the water department had a program called 10-30-50, where if your water bill was $1,000, you could pay 10%, and then you'd have the rest of it put over a period of time. And if you failed on that program, then it would go to 30%, then 50%. But generally, that program was very harsh, because if you couldn't afford 10%, you weren't going to afford 30 or 50. And if you failed in that, then often what you were left with is the fact that you didn't have any water. And we had tens of thousands of persons between the period of 2014 and up to COVID that were without water. Now, what I think of is particularly are the senior citizens who are unfairly often targeted in this situation. Many of them are on fixed income. Often their households are the stable places where many other family members come to when they don't have a place to live. I think of one resident that is on the east side, And this individual was bedridden. She had respiratory problems. She was diabetic. And she was being cared for by one of her daughters who unfortunately passed a year or so after we began to provide services. She had a bill of $1,600. She was unable to pay that bill. As a result of that, we provided water with her the first time, probably almost a year. And then her water was shut off again. And only recently, because of COVID, her water was restored. At different points of time, this household would have at minimum 10 people in it. You know, often the grandkids would come back. At one point, there were 7 children ranging in the ages of 13 to 1.5. One of the children had cancer. So, you know, it kind of breaks your heart to see these types of circumstances. We had another East Sider that was 75 years old, basically on a fixed income, and her bill was about $2,700. Her water was off 6 months, and she was able to get resources from other family members to get her water cut back on. We've had particularly persons that have had asthma. Asthma seems to be a very serious element that we have here in the city of Detroit. So many households have asthma, and it results in, you know, persons having to do without water as well. And when this occurs, then you have no way to maintain your household. So we are providing services to many different types of households here in the city of Detroit. It has been going on now for probably about the last 6 years. And with the COVID situation, it has somewhat rested, but as Sienna indicated, that is going to change by the end of this month. So those are just a few of the situations I'd like to share with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecily, for providing the perfect examples of why we need water affordability in the city of Detroit. Now we're going to speak with Professor Jason Stanley, who will give us the history of what precipitated the Detroit water shutoffs. Professor Jason Stanley is the Jacob Urofsky Professor of Philosophy at Yale University. Before coming to Yale in 2013, he was a distinguished professor in the Department of Philosophy at Rutgers University. And before moving to Rutgers, he taught at the University of Michigan from 2000 until 2004. Stanley is the author of How Propaganda Works and How Fascism Works. He writes about the authoritarianism, propaganda, free speech, mass incarceration, and neoliberalism for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Review, the Guardian, Project Syndicate, and the Chronicle of Higher Education, among other publications. Thank you. Jason, take it away.
Thank you so much. And it's an incredible honor to be with so many of the activists who've been on the front lines here. So to my mind, the national and international news media has missed an extraordinary story of world historical importance. The story is this: why does the state, with the world's greatest, with the greatest access, right next to the world's greatest supply of fresh water, why is that state, the state of Michigan in the United States, access to the Great Lakes, the world's greatest supply of fresh water, why is that state continually in crises about water? That is a news story of international importance. Something is happening when there's constant water crises in the state with the world's greatest access to fresh water. And when you frame the issue that way, I think you see the importance of the struggles of Detroit and the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan is being used as an experiment to see how to remove a core public good of democracy, water. Whenever the situation is being discussed in the national or international media. We're always distracted from that. We're always taken away from the fact that the one state where there should be no water issues is the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan is being used here. And whenever there's focus on what has happened in Michigan, we're distracted from what is going on. For example, Clinton, in her debate with Bernie Sanders in Flint 2016, said Flint has nothing to do with the big banks, that it's just racism and there's nothing to do with the big banks. Now, of course, the issues in Michigan have to do with racism. And my colleague, Professor Hammer, will be discussing that. And you cannot tear apart the issues of debt and racism in the United States. You know, as Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folk says, a pall of debt hangs over the beautiful land. The merchants are in debt to the wholesalers, the planters are in debt to the merchants, the tenants own the planters, and the laborers bow and bend beneath the burden of it all. Debt and racial hierarchy are intermingled in the United States. So I want to back up a little in the few minutes I have and just quickly look at the drivers here. So conceptually, democracy is a system based on freedom and equality. As Du Bois notes, you don't have freedom when you're entangled in debt. You can't do what you want. You just have to pay back pay back the debt. Democracy requires public goods. Usually these are public education, water, healthcare. These are and protection from danger, firefighters, police officers, and a military. So these are public goods in a democracy. What we're witnessing in Detroit is the removal of public goods, of a core public good from democracy. How is this happening? Well, we're being told that instead that the core thing we have to pay attention to is financial efficiency rather than equality and freedom. Now, there's an incredible scene, I think it's in Here's to Flint, where there's a meeting of Flint residents who are talking to an emergency manager official, and they say to him, our hair is falling out, our kids are there are splotches on their skin. And he says, well, do you have a money tree? So they're talking about life and equality and health. And he's responding by saying the only issue is debt and financial efficiency. He's changing the topic. So what you have in Detroit is an attempt, and in Michigan, is an attempt to say that the only values are financial efficiency. Now, financial efficiency, you first have to ask, efficient for whom? And if you look at the history of the Emergency Manager Act, you can see what's meant by financial efficiency. The Emergency Manager Act, of course, as everyone now knows, forbade emergency managers from suing bondholders. And of course, Detroit Water and Sewerage had a large debt to banks. We saw that the initial emergency managers, for instance, Kevin Orr from Jones Day, Trump's law firm, went and gave much more money to the banks for bad swap contracts than was reasonable. And those decisions were challenged. But throughout, it seems that the financial efficiency, the answer to efficient for whom is centered around two parties, the big banks and the water privateers. To me, it seems what's happening in Michigan is an alarm, not just for the nation, but for the international community, where we're being asked to hand over democratic values, to hand over the core public good of water accessibility for financial efficiency. And financial efficiency is not a democratic value, and there is no justification in any democratic theory for sacrificing democratically elected officials to the altar of financial efficiency. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Stanley, for illustrating for us the role of the banks in Detroit's water shutoffs. Next, we'll hear from Professor Peter Hamer, who will provide context on how structural and spatial racism have led to Detroit's water shutoffs.
Thank you, Tiana, and it's a real pleasure to be here on World Water Day talking about water affordability. I also want to thank Professor Stanley for spending his valuable time with us and bringing that economic perspective that drives home the fact these things are deeply interconnected. And you think about racial capitalism, and you have to talk about finance, you have to talk about debt, and that is often not part of the public discussion. So I really appreciate Professor Stanley making sure that we are making that part of the discussion that we are having here. So I'm going to screen share and go through some slides. And the reason I like doing this is I think maps matter. And this is an effort to try to show some graphic relationships through mapping of different sets of issues. But I also want to start thinking about this differently. And I want to give you different frames of entry into thinking about water affordability and start thinking about race and rates and infrastructure, and how race and rates and infrastructure are deeply interconnected, and that we really can't understand water shutoffs and water affordability without putting in that perspective of spatial structural racism that we stress at the Damon J. Center for Civil Rights at Wayne State University Law School. Most Americans, European Americans at least, think about racism as this abstract concept, right? You either are one or aren't one, or it's an issue of individual intent. And that's the absolute wrong way to think about racism. It's not an abstract idea. For American structural racism to function, right, it requires an elaborate bureaucracy. It requires a power structure and the financing and the banks that are discussed by Professor Stanley. It requires its own hydraulic system and architecture. And I'm using many of these words and not concepts metaphorically. It requires an infrastructure, and I'm not saying that metaphorically. It requires a propaganda machine to establish sets of belief systems that enable it to continue to function in its often oppressive ways. And we have to start thinking about the ways in which this spatial structural racism has shaped the physical, social, political, and economic environments in which we live. You know, I sometimes talk about how the glaciers shaped the mountains and the valleys during the Ice Age. Structural racism has that same ability to shape institutions and to shape geography in the United States. And in many respects, Detroit is ground zero for spatial structural racism. Right? And if we start thinking about race, rates, and infrastructure, Daniel Menzer at the University of Michigan has this wonderful book about the infrastructures of race, and is talking about a very different time and a very different context, but it's starting to show how a lot of people are thinking about this deep interconnectivity, and there are other resources here if people are trying to think harder about the interrelationships of infrastructure, race, and rates. But water is a wonderful illustration of how these things are deeply interconnected. All right, so let's start a little bit of definitional, right? So when I think about spatial racism or talk about spatial racism, what I'm really talking about is the hypersegregation of race, wealth, and opportunity. And one way to illustrate that connectivity is through this notion of opportunity mapping. And I'm stealing these maps from the Kirwan Institute that was commissioned by the Michigan Roundtable to produce them. And it's a very intuitive concept. Anything that can be measured can be mapped. Well, I can define and measure opportunity, and it means everything that you know at an intuitive level: housing, employment, schools, health, transportation, food security, living environment. And if I have another column over there and add that, you could say the social and economic determinants of health. And if I had a third column, you could look about the comorbidities of COVID-19 and how that's highly racialized. Again, showing how these things are deeply interconnected. But if you were to imagine a map of Southeast Michigan, and think in your mind's eye about areas where there's high opportunity and low opportunity. And if you were to paint in your mind's eye those areas of high opportunity in dark, rich colors, and those areas of low opportunity in light, pale colors, and if you're up in outer space and all you could see was high or low opportunity in Michigan, this is the map that you would see, right? And what you see is this opportunity desert, right? from outer space, but we also know that that opportunity desert has a geopolitical name. And the name of that opportunity desert is Pontiac. And that lets you start situate Oakland County, Macomb County, Wayne County, right? But we have an opportunity desert surrounded by a sea of opportunity. Oakland County is one of the richest historically counties in the country, right? So why do we have an opportunity desert surrounded by a sea of opportunity? You can come down and you can almost see the demarcation line of 8 Mile as an area of access to opportunity or not access to opportunity. And if you come over to the Grosse Pointes, you realize that there's high opportunity in some areas of Wayne County and low opportunities in others. And at this point, I always pause and stress that this is a story about systems and not individuals, right? This is a story about systems and not individuals. To have opportunity requires an elaborate infrastructure, economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, political infrastructure. So when I'm now mapping the absence of opportunity, I'm actually mapping the historic disinvestment in the infrastructures that are necessary to make opportunity work. Right? But the American mind, the European American mind, is trained to look at individuals and not systems. And we have to, again, break that framing and start looking at systems and the impact that systems have on individuals. Right? So this is a hyper segregation of wealth and opportunity. The next map is going to layer over racial demographics. And you're going to see green dots that are going to represent predominant African American communities by race. And when you do that, you get this map, right? And when you toggle back and forth, right, you see not only the segregation of wealth and opportunity, but the hyper-segregation of race, wealth, and opportunity, which becomes the definition of spatial racism. And that then becomes ground zero of spatial racism in the United States for Detroit, right? But then you have to say, well, how did that happen, right? And you start to realize that regional growth is a phenomenon that's taken over 100 years. You go back to the 20s and the 30s, you don't have suburbs, right? So what created the suburbs, right? Why were the suburbs created and subsidized as white space? And what implication did that have for the cities that remained in terms of their infrastructure, political, economic, and social, right? And a shout out to Monica Lewis-Patrick and We the People of Detroit, because I'm stealing your maps on this series of slides. I will guarantee you, you're not going to sell a house to anybody that doesn't have water. So the connectivity to a water system was essential to the growth of the suburbs. And these series of maps are going to illustrate that. And this entire system, this huge system that you're going to see unfold over time, is historically the Detroit Water and Sewer Department. Right. So in many respects, the water system helped create the white space that is now strangling cities like Detroit and Pontiac. And at the end of this, I'm going to make an argument out of sort of theories of restitution and reparations, why you can make a moral demand on the region for a regional water affordability plan. But this is the growth of the region starting in the 1950s, connected to the Detroit Water and Sewer Department. And we see how it grows in the 60s, right? We see the suburbs now growing in the 70s and 80s, right? And 90s, right? Up to 2009. And we see that then merging into that, recalling that map of spatial structural racism, right? The next series of maps are going to show that same time period roughly, but it's again be that story of black and white, where we're going to see the construction of the suburbs, but the suburbs are going to be filled with white folks, right? And we're going to have mechanisms that are going to create the racialized space that's defining Southeast Michigan today. So I want you to focus not only on the yellow and green, which is the racial demographics. I also want you to think about, look at the roads, right? Look at the construction over time, the production of this white suburban space. So 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, merging into that notion of spatial racism, right? So what does that have to do about water, right? What's the connection between spatial structural racism and water affordability and the water crisis? Well, you think about Detroit and Flint water systems, the parts that are serving the cities themselves, they're the oldest, often the most poorly maintained, and they're built in terms of fixed costs for cities that are 2 or 3 times bigger than the present population, right? And they're now asking that rate structure to be supporting that high cost of infrastructure, right? And as the maps and the analysis have demonstrated, this is a legacy of that white flight and the spatial racism that we face today. Cities can get caught in a death spiral where the high fixed costs are spread over fewer and fewer payers, so rates go up, right, making water even less affordable at the same time that the population may be decreasing over decades. right? And then this problem is compounded by that lack of opportunity, the structural poverty that exists, the lack of access to opportunity, the shipping out of the manufacturing jobs over the same period of time that we're mapping out the growth of the suburbs, right? So we presently have a system that is both unjust and unsustainable. If you understand this properly, right, you would be advocating for a regional water affordability plan. If you talk about the politics of the day and that inheritance of neoliberalism and fiscal austerity, instead we have water shutoffs. We have individual blame as opposed to understanding the spatial structural racism, the root causes of the analysis. And we have a failed infrastructure. And if we start seeing correctly, we can start seeing things like failed infrastructure, like the water shutoffs, as archaeological evidence of structural racism. But to do that, we have to develop new frames and new understandings and teach other people about them. Right? So a quick word about moving towards equity. You can think about law versus equity as a distinction that the non-lawyers don't have to worry about. But one equitable remedy historically has been this notion of restitution. And restitution has two very basic elements that I think explain what's happening in Southeast Michigan. A benefit has been conferred, right? And that's the actual growth of the suburbs, the creation, all of that wealth and opportunity that we've seen on those maps, and that it would be unjust for them to retain the benefit. And a related notion to start thinking about, I think, in terms of water, is reparations, right? The repairing or keeping in repair, the act of making amends, offering and giving satisfaction for wrong or injury. And if we properly understand where this crisis came from, the relationship between race, rates, and infrastructure, we can start seeing how we can effectively build the case for restitution and reparations. And that would be the form of a water affordability plan, creating sustainable water, clean, safe water for all the residents of Southeast Michigan. So thank you for your time, and congratulations, and thanks for all the other participants of this great webinar.
Thank you, Professor Hamer, for that illuminating presentation on spatial racism. Now, Senior Counsel for the Legal Defense and Education Fund, Coty Montag, will provide insight into the current lawsuit against the city of Detroit.
Hey, thank you so much, Tiana. Hello, everyone. I'm Coty Montag, Senior Counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I also serve as a researcher for LDF's Thurgood Marshall Institute. And I want to thank Monica, Tiana, and we the people of Detroit for inviting me here today and for all of the critical advocacy we the people does around water affordability in the city. So I'm really glad that Peter went first, because my comments are really going to build on what he has presented here today. I really want to talk about the intersection of race and water affordability and how litigation can be used as a tool to address affordability and collection issues that have a disproportionate impact on Black communities and other communities of color. So next slide, Tiana.
1 second, I want to make sure that the whole thing is showing. So let me just do one change. Sorry about that. I just want to make
No
sure
problem.
we show all. There you go. Wait. Are you seeing? Oh,
Yes, I can see it.
wait.
There might be a way to make it a little bigger.
I'm sorry about this, guys.
If you go to slideshow at the top.
Share. And then.
Well, I can keep talking while Tiana is sorting that out. So I started this work around water affordability and race for LDF in a research context about 3 years ago. And in June 2019, the Thurgood Marshall Institute at LDF published a report that I wrote entitled Watercolor, a study of race and the water affordability crisis in America's cities. And we had a few key findings in the report, none of which I think will surprise the advocates in this meeting. And I think many of them really build upon what Peter was just discussing. So great, if you could go ahead to slide, one more slide, Tiana. Great, so here are some of the key findings from LDF's watercolor report, We know that water costs are rising, mostly due to the need to replace failing and aging infrastructure. And due to the lack of federal funding and state funding, cities are passing on these costs to customers without considering ability to pay. And this has been shown to disproportionately impact Black communities, particularly when cities engage in aggressive collection efforts, including shutoffs or placing liens on homes to collect unpaid water debt, which we heard earlier from Cecily, can result in someone losing their home through tax foreclosure or mortgage foreclosure. And our report really emphasizes that this kind of municipal discrimination has a long history in the United States, particularly after the rise of residential segregation in the mid-20th century, when it became easier for cities to identify Black neighborhoods and to engage in discrimination more easily. And that's exactly what Peter was talking about in the last session. So next slide. So to address these issues, LDF and our partners have really been looking to litigation as one tool to address systemic municipal discrimination in water services, and particularly looking at the Fair Housing Act. And again, Peter set this up so nicely by talking about the connection between the habitability of one's home and water services. If you do not have water in your home, that is not meeting the basic decency needed to make that home habitable. And so the Fair Housing Act can be used as a tool here to address shutoffs, to address practices like placing water liens on homes that are shown to have a disproportionate impact on Black communities. And I won't go through all the elements of this slide, but just want to emphasize that the Fair Housing Act is really an underutilized tool and really is interpreted very broadly by courts. And so it's really a potentially viable tool to really hold municipalities accountable for water-related discrimination. Next slide. I just wanted to point out the two statutory provisions. Again, I won't get too far into the weeds, but we look at 42 USA 3604A, which prohibits practices that otherwise make housing unavailable. And courts have interpreted this language extremely broadly, including to apply to water-related services that have a disproportionate impact on a protected class. And also 3604B, which actually directly prohibits municipal discrimination in different types of services provided by local governments, including water services. Just want to point these out as two potential tools from the Fair Housing Act that can be used in litigation to address these issues. Next slide. So I wanted to spend the remainder of my remarks talking about two lawsuits, first starting with LDF's lawsuit in Pickett versus Cleveland. This is a lawsuit we filed in December 2019, and the main claim in the case is that Cleveland's practice of placing water liens on homes has a disproportionate impact on Black residents throughout Cuyahoga County, where Cleveland is located, and thus violates the Fair Housing Act. We also have a claim that Cleveland's practices with respect to how it conducts shutoffs, how it overbills customers, also violate the procedural due process protections of the US and Ohio constitutions. And this is really the first case of its kind challenging water liens directly under the Fair Housing Act. And I'm very happy to say that back in September, the judge denied Cleveland's motion to dismiss, allowing the case to proceed. So we are now in the discovery phase of the case and are able to fully litigate this case and ensure that we can try to address these issues that we've identified. So next slide. And this is a little bit hard to see, but just wanted to point out, this is one of the maps from our complaint. This is from 2018. This is using publicly available data on water liens. And what you're seeing here is all of Cuyahoga County, with of course Cleveland at the center. And the shades of blue as they get darker are showing the Black population as it increases. And so Cleveland is very racially segregated. You can see the very, very dark blue in part of the map. And if you can see, the red dots represent water liens. And so you can see, even if you can't see that well, that these liens are disproportionately located in the most predominantly Black areas of Cleveland. So this is exactly what we're challenging here through our lawsuit, and just wanted to bring a visual aspect of it for you to see. So next slide. And then of course, I wanted to touch on LDF's case challenging water shutoffs in Detroit, and we were litigating this case with the ACLU of Michigan, with Alice Jennings, with the Michigan Poverty Law Program. And this was a lawsuit filed last July to challenge shutoffs. And like the Cleveland case, we're not challenging water liens, we're challenging water shutoffs under the Fair Housing Act. And what we're alleging here is that these shutoffs have a disproportionate impact on Black communities. They're unjustified, they violate the Fair Housing Act, and Detroit should not be permitted to conduct these shutoffs any longer. We have other claims in the case as well under the US Constitution. We have a claim similar to that raised in the Flint lawsuit, alleging a substantive due process claim based on bodily integrity due to the health impacts from water shutoffs that were also discussed earlier. And what we're really trying to focus here on is the disproportionate impact of shutoffs on the Black residents of Detroit. And one thing we've been able to show in our complaint, to allege in our complaint, is that these shutoffs are not just related to income. That if you control for income in our statistical analyses, these shutoffs still have a disproportionate impact on Black residents. And so while income is a very important aspect of what's happening here, and certainly one that should not be disregarded, it's not the only thing happening here. Race is certainly a factor, we believe, in what we're alleging in the suit in terms of what Detroit is doing through its shutoff practice. We know that Detroit has stated that it plans to permanently end shutoffs, that at least intends to continue the moratorium to the end of 2022, and it intends to permanently end shutoffs. What we have said in the lawsuit is that we need many more specifics, and we need to be part of that process to ensure that it's done correctly and to ensure that Detroit stands by its word, given this disproportionate impact on the Black residents of the city. I know many of you were able to join the hearing that we had virtually on February 3rd. Detroit and the other defendants are moving to dismiss the case. We had a very long hearing. The judge, heard all of our different arguments. We're still awaiting a ruling on that. So we will see what the judge decides and if the case can move forward, but we're hoping for a good result. And so one final slide, and then I will wrap up. And again, this is just, trying to show a visual representation of what's happening here. Similar to the Cleveland map, this is set up a little bit differently. You can see the more orange areas are the areas with a predominantly Black population in Detroit. You can see that the shutoffs are much more concentrated in those orange areas as compared to the white areas of the map. And so this is one of the maps from our complaint that we allege supports our claims that this has a disproportionate impact on Black residents of Detroit. So I will wrap up here and turn it back over to Tiana. We can keep you posted if you're interested in hearing about these cases moving forward. But want to just emphasize that the Fair Housing Act can be used as a tool to address municipal discrimination in water services. Thank you.
Thank you, Coty, for that super enlightening and clarifying discussion, especially around the legal issues in the lawsuit against the city of Detroit. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Nadia Gaber on the impact of water insecurity on public health.
Thanks, Tiana. Thank you all for those presentations and for having me on this World Water Day. So I want to talk about work that we've done at We the People with this community research collective. And I've been a part of this collective for going on 5 years now, and it's been an absolute honor to lend some of my skills and passions as an academic researcher to do work that is really driven by the interests and the needs of the community in terms of understanding and having accurate information out there that shows the relationship between water shutoffs, racism, and health. So I will briefly talk about our collective, how we've worked to uncover water unaffordability, and especially as the COVID-19 pandemic has come through Detroit, and some of what we continue to work on in order to address the issue. So just a bit about me. I am trained in medical anthropology. So my field, we study the relationship between cultural, social, and political determinants of health, and how it's really the environment in which you live that shapes your access to health care, but also your baseline state of health. And I came to Michigan in 2015, just after the United Nations had come and said that these water shutoffs were a violation of the human right to water. I'm really struck by the appearance of human rights crises in the United States, and began to understand water as one way in which structural racism shows up. So unfortunately, Michigan has become a quite visible epicenter of these issues. So I'm sure all of you heard about the Flint water crisis, where through some of these undemocratic decisions, Flint was taken off the treated Detroit water and put on their own Flint River water. And then the emergency managers did not pay for basic corrosion control, with the interest ultimately of building a private pipeline rather than continuing to buy public water from Detroit. And we know that the entire city was exposed to toxic levels of lead, but also other contaminants. And then on the right, this is a picture of the Detroit Health Department's former building. So following the bankruptcy, the health department was deemed a non-core city service. And this is one of the first places in the country where we talked about public goods being taken away, where the whole public health enterprise was considered not financially lucrative and not core to the mission of a city. And then you also have water crises in the form of uranium spills into the Detroit River, which is shown on the left, so industrial type accidents, and the kind of slow accumulation of chemicals that are untested and untreated in water. And on the right, this is a cloud of PFAS foam, which is affecting many of the lakeside towns in northern Michigan and across the country and across the world. So, these water crises really come together as effects of structural racism coming out of the spatial alignment of racism in Southeast Michigan that Professor Hammer explained and that our other presenters have talked about. So structural problems take structural solutions. And just a glance at what We the People of Detroit has done. So in addition to, I mentioned our community research collective, we gather to do historical and contemporary research into the effects of water shutoffs. We also manage the water rights hotline, which Cecily McClellan spoke about, that continues to deliver water on an emergency basis to families in need. We have youth leaders who have really become at the forefront of advocating for water justice. And we do presentations and put out publications like this in order to serve the community at large and kind of return the products of all of those, the fruits of all of that labor to the community. So you've seen some maps from Mapping the Water Crisis, but this was really a study that used the tool of visualization to show how racism has been built into the water infrastructure system in Detroit. Dr. Hammer spoke about how the expansion of the Detroit water system over the 20th century created a system in which the Detroit water system serves 40% of the state of Michigan, reaching as far as Flint Township, Flint and its surrounding townships. But Detroit alone holds the debt for that system. And so we see a lot of unevenness in who is being forced to carry the burden of expanding that system. This is a map that we did, and I have to give credit to our designer and mapper, Emily Cudel, who really, it's her artful hand, I think, that makes these statistics come to life. But there's this narrative that Detroit has been price gouging suburban communities, when in fact, Detroit sells water at wholesale rates to those communities, and then they market up to retail rates and keep all of those profits in the suburbs rather than flowing back into the city. And the bubbles just give a sense of how much the markup is in those suburbs. None of those profits come back to Detroit. And it's also about democracy. So this is a map of emergency management in Michigan. The purple dots represent African-American population. The yellow dots are white or Caucasian. Orange is Latinx. And you can see that And then the black lines are outlines where a district or a city was taken over by an unelected emergency manager who was installed by the governor to impose fiscal discipline. And you can see that all of the areas where people of color live were basically taken over, and the democratic rights of those citizens were suspended under emergency management. So we partnered with Henry Ford Health System to look at how this impacted health, and did this study of people who came into the emergency department and into their hospital system with water-related illnesses and where they lived, and whether that correlated with where shutoffs were happening. We found that yes, if you lived in an area with shutoffs, you were 1.5 times more likely to get a water-related disease, and that also controlled for income and controlled for a number of socioeconomic factors. So we found this neighborhood level effect. Then we wanted to do a citywide survey. So we organized ourselves as more than 40 volunteers, trained ourselves using federal public health toolkits that, again, a functioning and funded public health department might have been able to do, but instead that burden fell on the community members to go out. We knocked on more than 700 doors across the city of Detroit, and we found that 26% of households had been shut off or were currently at risk of being shut off in the year 2016 to 2017. And the average length of time that residents lived without water in their homes was 10.5 days. At the time, the Detroit Water and Sewage Department said most people were reconnected within 24 hours. And the county put out a health advisory saying anyone who is vulnerable, especially vulnerable population, should be protected from these water shutoffs. We found that more than 82% of households would meet that exemption criteria on their basis of their health status alone. But we wanted to do a deeper dive. We wanted to look more locally. So we went to a food pantry in the Brightmoor neighborhood, and we asked people about how water unaffordability impacted their lives. And quite remarkably found that more than 3/4 of residents who were especially low income and vulnerable had drank water they thought might be unsafe for their health, worried they wouldn't have enough water to meet their basic needs, were borrowing and sharing water with neighbors and friends, and 1/3 had collected water from an undesirable or dirty source. That research we published together in the Journal of Public Health and was picked up by The Guardian as they have come to understand water unaffordability as a big picture issue across the United States. So just really briefly, you can check out their series, but water bills have gone up more than 80% in a decade, well outpacing inflation. Obviously, we haven't had an increase in the minimum wage in a substantive way in a long time. So there are cities all over the country where residents can't afford their water. And this study from Michigan State University showed that by 2022, which is just next year now, more than 1/3, about 36% of Americans will be unable to afford basic water services. That has health outcomes even in areas you might not expect, like basic racial disparities in hydration. So as municipal water becomes so expensive, people are increasingly turning to bottled water, which isn't actually regulated to as much of a health and safety standard. And sugar sweetened beverages and sodas are becoming cheaper than water in many places. And so we see growing racial disparities in just access to drinking water. And to bring it back to Detroit, a former director of health found a rise in these rare infectious diseases that had mostly been eliminated in the US, correlating with the timing of the Detroit water shutoff. So you saw Campylobacter, shigellosis, and Giardia on the rise in and around Detroit, we believe because of the water shutoffs. And to put it in historical perspective, water treatment and sanitation are the most important public health technology in US history, certainly in the 20th century, more than antibiotics, for example. This study showed that in various cities, including Detroit, those vertical lines in that bottom right graph show the installation of water chlorination and water filtration, and the rates of typhoid alone just plummeted, but the total mortality rate dropped 40%, more than 43%, just because of clean water technologies. And these are basic and technologies that we've had for more than 100 years. So as COVID-19 came through Detroit, our research collective, kicked into high gear again and tried to use the shutoff data that we had to map the spread of COVID-19 through Detroit. So on the left here outlined are the zip codes with the top rates of shutoffs. And we did it two ways. One, the top numbers of shutoffs, and two, the top rate, just to control for population density, but they're broadly the same. So the areas with the highest rates of shutoffs are shown in the top left, and then in the bottom left, you had the number of residents over 65. So knowing that those people had higher rates of the pre-existing conditions and comorbidities that predispose to worse COVID outcomes, you see that shutoffs are happening to our elders in their neighborhoods. But on the right, I think Emily very smartly said, well, we need to take out nursing homes, because a lot of the narrative is that, yes, COVID is spreading through nursing homes. But if we control for that with these pie graphs, where the yellow is the percent that was in the nursing homes, we actually see that most of the COVID spread in these neighborhoods was actually due to community spread. And most of it is concentrated in the zip codes where the shutoff rates are highest. We also did a policy audit of where states had imposed a moratorium on water shutoffs, either a full moratorium on effect or a partial moratorium of some kind because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as Coty mentioned, we are really looking for a permanent moratorium on water shutoffs in Michigan and really nationwide because it is a human right. We all saw that there were significant racial disparities in COVID cases and deaths around the country, not only in Michigan. And I just want to point out, this was a statement by a state senator who's also a physician, who asked, could it just be that African Americans or the colored population do not wash their hands as well as other groups, or wear masks, or don't socially distance themselves? And so you have these individualizing, stigmatizing ways of stereotyping communities and making them kind of victims of their own structural of their own health disparities, when in fact we know that those health disparities, like water shutoffs, are structural. And one study done last year as the COVID-19 pandemic was ripping through the US showed that on American Indian reservations, the #1 predictor of an increase in COVID-19 infection rates and death was a lack of indoor plumbing. Sorry, and then also to put into perspective, this is a study that was done in 2019 that asked about water insecurity worldwide. And this graph shows just the percent of people who reported that they were unable to wash their hands in the last 30 days. So you see it reaching epic proportions, and Detroit and other areas of the United States would appear similarly devastating on this list. So We the People of Detroit is continuing to do water deliveries. We have a water shift coming up this Saturday. You can go to wethepeopleofdetroit.com to learn how you can help. We'll be delivering water to Detroit, Flint, Benton Harbor, and Jackson, Mississippi. And we also want to engage you through our text alerts, through our emails, through webinars like this. You can make a donation or volunteer again at our website, wethepeopleofdetroit.com. But there's also, I think, an increasing awareness to this issue. So one major fight that's been going on has been to reform the charter of the city of Detroit, to actually put into the charter that every Detroiter has a right to water, and to make sure that that's protected under law. There's a national bill, the Human Right to Water bill, introduced by our own Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib and Debbie Dingell, that you should read more about, and please find out how to support by contacting your representative. And there's also statewide efforts. So many groups came together to put together a 10-point water affordability plan. These were like the must-haves of affordable water in Michigan. And there's a pledge that you can sign online, which I hope all of you will do by the time World Water Day is over at our website. And then finally, kind of thinking about this more socially, there, in the wake of all of these water crises, from Flint to Detroit, the PFAS crisis, all of this contamination, I think We the People of Detroit has really been visionary in thinking about transforming, turning that trauma into transformation. And so there's plans underway to create a camp for youth that allows them to reconnect with water, to restore their relationship to water, so that it's not only about shutoffs, it's not only about racism and their dispossession, but that actually allows youth to connect with water and with each other through water, and rebuild some of that loving relationship to the planet. And Monica always says, quoting our famous Mayor Coleman Young, when you find a good fight, get in it. And this is certainly one that Professor Stanley mentioned is of world historic proportions, should not be happening in the United States or anywhere else, and needs all of your support and engagement.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for that enlightening presentation on how water insecurity impacts us all and our public health. Next, we have a panel of experts who have met the challenges of water affordability and were able to push to implement them in their cities. So on our panel, we have, I'm gonna try and share really quickly. On our panel, we have Mary Grant, who is the Public Water for All campaign director at Food and Water Watch. We have Rihanna Echo, who is the senior organizer on the national organizing team for Food and Water Watch and was instrumental in implementing water affordability in Baltimore. And we have Robert Ballenger, who is the co-director of the energy unit of the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. And the discussion will be moderated by Jill Ryan, who is the executive director at Freshwater Future, and Gwendolyn Winston, who is the president of the G. Bailey Winston Enterprises. So.
Thank you so much, Tiana. So we appreciate the three panelists being on today. I'm happy to be here moderating with Gwen, and we're going to jump right in because, as you can tell from the speed of the information that's coming, we're short on time, but rich in information. So I would like to start with a question about how was water affordability achieved in Philadelphia? And to start that, I'd like Rob Ballenger to speak for a moment.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back in Detroit, even though I'm actually in Philadelphia, but I look forward to hopefully making it out there again soon. So water affordability in Philadelphia has been a ongoing process since, well, really for many, many years, but I think we started making some strides in around 2011 or 2012 when we got some really good data on how our existing program was failing to A, deliver affordable bills, and B, keep low-income people from actually having increased indebtedness for water service. So we were able to get a champion in City Council here in Philadelphia, Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez, who understood that her district, which was comprised of a large percentage of people of color, was adversely impacted and disproportionately so, and wanted to do something about it. And as a law firm that has represented low-income Philadelphians for 50 some odd years and has dealt with problems of utility insecurity for about 45 of those years, we partnered with the council member to draft legislation. That legislation took quite a while to pass, about a year and a half. And then implementation took yet another year and a half or so, until we were finally able to accept applications in July of 2021. I'm sorry, that's not right. July of 2019. And since then, the program has actually been very successful in identifying participants and getting people enrolled into the program. It is far less costly than we estimated. And what we're seeing is that people who are provided affordable bills do pay them. Low-income customers who get affordable bills under our water affordability program are twice as likely to pay them in full as low-income customers who are not participating in that program. So we know that this is the kind of thing that that meaningfully contributes to the individual customer's ability to interact with the utility, to make the payments, meet the demands that are placed on them. And so we're now implementing arrearage forgiveness finally, and within a couple of years, those TAP participants who've remained in the program will have eliminated all of the debt that they had prior to enrollment. So the program is effective, it is working, and we're very proud of all the progress that we've made for low-income Philadelphians.
That is wonderful to hear, Rob, and thank you for that description. So we can get a sense of another city. I'd also like to ask the same question: how was water affordability achieved? But this time in Baltimore. And Rihanna, if you could speak to that.
Rihanna is running. Oh, Rihanna?
I can speak to that. I'm Mary
good.
with Food and Water Watch.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary.
Sure. So we began the Baltimore Right to Water Coalition formed in 2016. So we're still working for affordable water. We were able to pass the Water Accountability and Equity Act in 2019. It was signed into law at the beginning of 2020, but we're still waiting for it to go into effect. They're working on implementation right now, and we have a firm commitment from our new mayor for it to go into effect July of this year. And so we're really excited. We're seeing the metrics from Philadelphia, and it's really promising that the income-based water affordability program will really meet the needs of people and meet them where they're at to make sure that they can afford their bills and they can pay it. It's been a pretty long process in Baltimore to get it into law. I think the key to how it worked was Rihanna's on now and she can talk about it a little bit, but it was really the coalition, the organizing effort on the ground, making calls into the city council, building up champions, making sure that people were like on the front lines and in touch with their elected officials, their city council members to really bring it to fruition. We had also a really good champion with our new mayor, Brandon Scott, when he was city council president, really driving it home and making sure that we're holding the water department accountable, making sure that we're getting it done, and we're really passing a strong piece of legislation. So I'll pass it over to Rihanna right now if she wants to fill in anything more about how water affordability was achieved in Baltimore.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Mary. And thank you all for being here this afternoon. In Baltimore, I would say, yeah, as Mary said, our coalition, the Baltimore Right to Water Coalition, played a really huge role in passing the Water Accountability and Equity Act. We built up a broad base of groups from across the city who really represented a wide variety of different people. You know, we had landlords involved and labor unions, just a wide variety of folks. And then I would say also that the media was a really powerful tool in our campaign, and using storytelling was really powerful. So many people, unfortunately, so many people have been harmed by Baltimore's water system. And so we were able to work with residents who are willing to share their stories about how the water system had really impacted their lives, how unaffordable water bills had, almost cost them their homes or their churches. And those stories, I think, really made it so that council members heard loud and clear what the impacts were and how this system was harming residents of our city and really needed to be changed. So I think the media was also a really powerful tool, as well as our coalition.
Excellent. Thank you both, Mary and Rihanna. We'll come back to you in just a minute, but that was really helpful. Rob, I'd like to go back to you to talk a little bit about what were the challenges you faced in Philadelphia.
So, I think the main challenge that we had was really determining some of the details. We really wanted the legislative solution to be a complete one that would establish the program more or less from soup to nuts. But we ended up through the process of passing legislation with something more like a framework for what water affordability would look like, which then left us to pursue program design in a separate proceeding. So that's one of the reasons it took quite a long time for the program to ultimately be launched. is that we had to really determine, in the context of the water department's rate case in 2016, what the program was going to look like. And I think I misspoke earlier when I said the program launched in 2019. It was 2017. So it took quite a while in that process to convince the board of some of the very important things that we felt were essential to a program that would actually work. The main one being bills that are based exactly upon what is deemed affordable. And the only way to do that is successful in any circumstance is to calculate the bill as an affordable percentage of household income. And there was a lot of disagreement about that, but that is what we ended up with. Ultimately, the water rate board that sets the water department's bills, sets their rates and charges, agreed with us that was the right way to calculate the affordable bills. So any customer in the program will get a bill that is either 2.5, or 3% of their household income per month, and that's all they're required to pay to maintain, water and wastewater service in their homes. But that was the biggest hurdle to get past, was to really come to really submit to an independent board to make a decision about something that important. And we're grateful that they believed in our viewpoint about the importance of prioritizing affordability and making the administration of this really simple. From the customer standpoint, it's very easy to plan when you know exactly how much your bills are going to be.
That's critically important, as we know, and so it's good to hear that you were able to overcome that. Thank you, Rob. And so back over to Rihanna and Mary. Same question. What challenges did you face?
This is a loaded question. We had a lot of challenges in our campaign, and I'm laughing mainly because, not because it was funny, but our main opposition in this campaign was honestly our Department of Public Works. They were really hesitant to accept that doing an income-based affordability program could be beneficial both for Baltimoreans and for the fiscal health of the department. And they were really our primary opposition to the legislation. But we faced, it took us, the Water Accountability and Equity Act, it was thought of, we worked with the then council president to have him commit to introducing it in 2016. It was 2017. It was finally introduced in 2018. It didn't pass until 2019 because there was also during that time just a lot of political upheaval in Baltimore, and there was a mayor that got caught for embezzlement and fraud and had to step down. So there was a whole political process, but really that extended the timeline. But a lot of it came from the Department of Public Works and them dragging their feet on moving forward with a better solution. Mary, do you have anything else to add?
Like if there was a problem, we experienced it. We also had a ransomware attack that took our billing system completely offline. And then right as they were trying to implement the bill, the pandemic hit. And the former mayor actually passed an executive order in July of last year, right before the bill was supposed to go into effect, delaying it indefinitely, claiming that the pandemic is a reason why we don't need to have affordable water. It just didn't make sense to us. I think he was just passing the buck, knowing that he lost the primary, so he would not be coming back into office. So passing the buck, dropping the ball. And fortunately, our new mayor did pick up that ball that he dropped, and we were able to pass last year a modifications bill to get the city back on a schedule, back on a timeline to implement the bill. And then at the same time, to also pass really strong tenant protections in the interim. While we're waiting for this bill to go into effect, tenants can actually, get added to their bill, can get information about their bill and have some protections while we wait for the full legislation to go into effect in July.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those answers. It's good to hear those things. And I'm going to pass it over to Gwendolyn Winston to continue questions.
Thank you very much, Jill. This has been very informative. Our question to you is that coming to Detroit now, our Mayor Duggan, position is that it is unfair to use income levels to determine water rates, to determine water bills, and that people with higher incomes will be disadvantaged. So I'm wondering, with your experiences, how would you call the mayor into thinking harder, as Professor Hammer said? How do you call the mayor into thinking harder in a majority Black city? Can we start with Rob?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here. Thank you. I think that's really wrong. Obviously, the reason why it's wrong is that with a low income program, you're not creating additional costs for customers. Okay. There's nothing has changed from the utilities perspective in terms of how much it needs to get back from all customers to deliver the service. So if you have, 10% or 20% of however much of your, the population served by the water system, if they can't afford the bills, those bills are going to go unpaid. And if the solution, and the only solution that the utility can come up with, is to just hike the rates higher to collect from everyone who is paying, well, then they're not being very creative in doing that. I think the answer here is what you see with a low income program is that you're taking that cost, that uncollectible bill that otherwise would have just been bad debt, that would have sat there and not been paid, and you're turning it into a discount. And in fact, you're turning it into a discount that is less expensive for the system, because again, your low-income customers who are participating in a program like this, by and large, they're going to pay their affordable bills. But if you deliver them a bill that's not affordable, they're not going to make a partial payment on it. You're going to get virtually nothing back. So a low-income program, it's not unfair to the customers who don't participate. What's unfair to them is to keep raising their rates to subsidize, well, to not subsidize, in fact, just to allow debt to accumulate that will never be recovered, or at least if it is recovered, it's recovered in a way that creates just unbearable social costs outside of the system. It creates housing displacement. It creates loss of custody of minor children. It creates homelessness. It creates public health risks. You can avoid that with a low-income program. So I think the fairest thing is to actually adopt one.
Thank you, Rob. It's very informative. And so, Rihanna and Mary, you had a new elected mayor, and the same question to you. What would you say to Detroit's mayor?
I would tell him that he should be ashamed of himself. That's a completely wrong way to view what is affordability program. I remember that when a couple of years ago, when we were in the middle of our campaign, there was an image about you've probably seen it. There's an image about all these kids trying to watch a baseball game, and they have a fence over them, and then they're all on the ground. And if you're short, you can't see over the fence and see it. And so there was a picture about equity, being that equity is that you equally distribute blocks so that everyone can see over the fence. But then you have to take that a step farther and think about what is really justice. There shouldn't be a fence there, right? Everyone deserves water, regardless of your ability to pay. I think that at our core is how we need to frame this. That it isn't unfair to people who make more money. They should be paying their fair share. Corporations should be paying their fair share. We need to restore federal funding. The burden shouldn't be on water rates. Water rates are incredibly regressive. We need to make this more progressive, more equitable, and more just.
Rihanna, would you like to comment?
Sure. I would just say, retweet to what Mary just said, and that she really captured it. But I would reemphasize that it's water is a human right. Everyone needs it. But affordability programs are, also good for the fiscal health of the utility, like Rob mentioned. In Baltimore, they currently have a water discount program that gives everyone under 175% of the federal poverty line a 43% discount on their water bills. And there was a fiscal analysis of that BH2O Assist program compared to our soon to be implemented Water for All affordability program that found that over the course of 5 years, the income-based affordability program would save the city $20 million in expenses, and it would also serve, I believe, a third more people than the current H2O Assist program. So really, when it's a win-win to have affordability programs like this. It's better for the utility and it's better for people, and it doesn't make any sense to ignore the research and results that show that this is true and continue to perpetuate water injustice in this way.
I think it was said earlier, Professor Hammer's topic, race, rates, and infrastructure, gives a holistic meaning what you're sharing with us. So you talked about the programs, a payment assistance plan. So would you go over again what makes water affordability more impactful than a payment assistance plan to get residents caught up? We'll go back to you, Rob.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we use the term assistance pretty loosely. I think, someone, and just sort of piggybacking off of what Rihanna was talking about, if you provide everyone with X% discount, well, some people actually are going to need more and some people aren't going to need that much. And so what you do is you have a system that basically doesn't actually target affordability. It just provides everyone sort of, a sort of an arbitrary amount of bill relief, which doesn't reflect upon their usage pattern. It doesn't reflect upon their household composition. And on the high ends, it creates, it's sort of wasteful, right? Because you're giving people who might not need a 43 or 50% or however much discount, the same discount as you're giving someone who really probably needs a 75% discount. The idea of affordability is to actually determine, through some reasonable lens, what is affordable for customers who can't afford to pay. And, I admit that there's some arbitrariness to any program where you set, a maximum income level. So I think you have to be able to come up with other creative ways of dealing with people who are in need above that arbitrary income level. But that's sort of the way these programs have worked for years and years. That's the way, we treat federal home energy relief for low-income families. We have a standard, so at least we have a starting point. And beyond that, I think you can be creative in coming up with ways to meet the needs of folks who don't actually fall within the income level limitations. But affordability is not the same as assistance.
That's a really stark statement that affordability is not the same as assistance. Breaking through that in Detroit is really an important point to make. So after all of this has been said, then what is that creativity? What is that imagination that we could pass the word on to the mayor of Detroit? Rihanna?
Well, I would say to the mayor of Detroit that, this is hard. He should really already be on board. And I know that y'all are doing some really powerful organizing. So I don't want to say that I have, the secret key to make him change his mind. But I really think when it comes down to it, affordability programs make sure that water bills are constantly affordable, and assistance programs, if you're offering folks a flat rate, every year if there's a rate increase, their bill gets higher and higher, even if it's discounted. So in a few years, if you've had a number of rate increases, that bill is just going to be as high as it was before the discount program. So what we need to do is make sure that water bills stay affordable and stay stable with the household income. If someone starts making more money, their water bill can be a little bit higher, but our federal minimum wage has not changed. So people's water bills should not change. Unless people are making more money, they should not be forced to pay more for water. And really just, everyone everyone needs water. This pandemic has shown that, and it's really important that we provide equal access to folks, and it's not something that people should be priced out of. It's not a luxury.
Thank you, Rihanna and Rob and and Mary. And on that note, I think that's a good note to leave and a message to those who are making decisions that are not equitable and certainly don't lead to freedom. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists. That was a really informative discussion on the process for achieving affordability. And hopefully we're on our way in our city. Thank you guys so much. Now we are in for a special treat with a performance from Mama Soul. Mama Soul? I don't know.
I'm so sorry, y'all. I was in there. My son had me distracted. But it was by design for us to be on welfare, to live in projects with no health care, with very little direction. But then heat that pot and whip a Pyrex come. Hella high water and collect them crumbs. Puff Newports and neglect our lungs. Sip malt liquor till depression comes. Seeping in, think a sink or swim. I'm from where there's lead in the water. I ain't sleep or dumb. Rather Rick the ruler or Mansa Musa, our bloodline is royal and you can't fool her. Who are you to suppose we should sell our souls when society strokes egos and steps on toes of the great? And on a pedestal, they put fakes and then assassinate Malcolm, Martin, and Fred Hampton, huh? You don't see what's happening here, y'all? They label lames as famous. We do the same. It's the blind leading the blind, so an eye for an eye don't apply to the poor and the uninformed. Gods and goddesses that were placed in bondage before we were slaves, our people were prophets. The first physicians, astrologists, mathematicians, chemists, and really we in a great position. But it seems our ambition makes the law suspicious. We're the target of the system. If we take a stand, we still fall victim. And we waded in the water. They sold our husbands, raped our daughters. Pray for change, but why bother? Accounted as sheep for the slaughter. There's nowhere to run to. Pain so deep we can't undo. We've been asleep for a while now, but it is our time to come to. Got the power to pull through, cause God made us indestructible. Got the power to pull through, cause God made us indestructible. It's time to acknowledge the power of our people, despite the agendas to devour our people. It ain't no sport that's more important than our people. See, it started with them stealing and them importing our people. Cap, he was kneeling because police been putting steel inside our people, make a killing off the killing and exploitation of our people. And they've been poisoning our people. I'm from Flint. I won't forget about my people. I swear I be seeing God in my people, blood of royal rulers flowing deep inside of my people. Removing bamboozling, cooning for my people. I'm panther with it, you hoover and you fooling the people. Stop rapping if you're not a prophet for our people and you only here to try to make a profit off our people. That's Willie Lynch and I'm Marshawn about that action. Don't be pushing perks and pills and Michael Jackson at our people. Yeah, I'm peaceful, I'm enlightened, but I fight for my people. Bringing balance to rap like my aunt and split the pot with my people. Form a movement that's moving and bring improvement to my people. Y'all excluded most of our history from school like we ain't equal. That ain't cool. You call us niggas and coons when we regal and royal. We're descendants of soil where the diamonds and gold and precious minerals are plentiful. And so I came to finish what our ancestors didn't do. Can't abort the mission, been at war for centuries with Satan and his henchmen. Y'all need to tighten up, look and listen. And it doesn't cost much to pay attention, because when it all falls down, we bounce back again somehow. Something in the DNA's profound. So don't put down your crown. I swear I'll be seeing God in my people, blood of royal rulers flowing deep inside of my people. I swear I'll be seeing God in our people, blood of royal rulers flowing deep inside of our people. Ashe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing and touching piece, Mama Soul. Next, we have Monica Lewis-Patrick, who will deliver a powerful talk on structural violence and water shutoffs. Monica Lewis-Patrick is an educator, entrepreneur, and human rights activist and advocate. Along with the other four founders of We the People of Detroit, she, with the leadership of volunteers and community experts, placed herself and We the People of Detroit at the forefront of the water justice struggle in Michigan, across the country, and globally. Monica is known throughout the environmental justice community as the Water Warrior. She is actively engaged in the struggle for access to safe, affordable water for all under-resourced communities. In 2019, she was appointed to the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice by Governor Whitmer. Take it away, Monica.
Peace and blessings, family. I'll be very brief. I don't think there's much more that I can add. You have heard from some of the brightest minds on the planet in terms of the fact that water affordability not only is good for water infrastructure, it's good for humanity. It's good for moving austerity out of the way and transforming us into a nation that understands that water is a human right. My dog, my cat, even my goldfish has more rights than my neighbors, my family, my friends. We cannot allow this to stand. And so we've already offered to you to sign on to the pledge at We the People of Detroit to make sure you're engaged in the fight for water affordability. I hope that the information you heard today, you'll take with you. Deputize yourselves, in the words of the Honorable Joanne Watson. We already have seen here in Detroit, the template for water affordability was birthed here, but we've actually seen it codified in other places like Philadelphia, in Baltimore, and we are excited about that. But we believe that the nation deserves water affordability, and we're determined that if we're going to talk about building back better, we better make sure that we're not only writing Black Lives Matter in the streets, but we're making sure that Black and brown and poor folks can drink. And so I thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Tiana.
Thank you, Monica. I do want to share that you all may go to the We the People of Detroit website, and at the very top of the site, click Take the Pledge. It'll take you to this very short form where you can join us in encouraging our legislators to implement a water affordability platform for the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that this was very informative for everyone, as it was for me. And we will be publishing this program. Sorry, Zoom, right? We will be publishing this program on our website, and we'll let you know when it's available. Thank you.
Can we thank our sponsors really quick? Could we thank Freshwater Futures, the amazing Peter Hammer, and the Damon Keefe Center? Also want to thank the Midwest Environmental Justice Network for their support as well, to the entire tech team and all the amazing support. Thank you again, Tiana, for leading the way. We are so grateful for all of you joining us today.